Alan Carter stood at the viewport of the USMC Starship Resolute, watching the stars blur as the vessel pushed through space. He ran his fingers through his short brown hair and sighed. This wasn't where he had planned to be at 35 years old. 6 weeks ago, he had been working in one of the best hospitals on Earth. Now he wore the uniform of a military medical officer, deployed to the front lines of humanity's war against the Drax Collective. The year was 2157, and mankind's expansion into the stars had brought them face to face with the reptilian Drax. The aliens saw humans as nothing more than soft prey, unworthy of the planets they claimed. 3 years of brutal conflict had followed. Alan turned away from the view of space and walked through the medical bay. His area, his responsibility. The smell of antiseptic and the soft beeping of monitoring equipment made him feel more at home than anywhere else on this warship. "Dr. Carter, Captain Summers requests your presence on the bridge," announced the ship's AI through the speakers. Alan straightened his uniform and made his way through the corridors. Crew members stepped aside, some nodding respectfully, others watching with curious eyes. His reputation had arrived before him. Dr. Alan Carter, the miracle worker, the surgeon who could save patients others had given up on, and also the doctor who had refused combat training, who had made it clear he was here to heal, not to harm. The bridge doors slid open, revealing a busy command center. At its heart stood Captain Olivia Summers, her athletic frame tense as she studied tactical displays. She was younger than Alan had expected for a ship's captain, perhaps in her early 40s with streaks of gray in her black hair that spoke of the burdens of command. "Dr. Carter, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing him closer. "I wanted to meet the man who will be keeping my crew alive." "I'll do my best, Captain," Alan replied simply. Summers studied him for a moment. "Your file says you've never served in a combat zone before." "I've worked in disaster areas. Mass casualties aren't new to me. Disasters don't shoot back, Doctor." Her voice wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. "The Drax don't take prisoners. They certainly don't respect medical personnel or follow any conventions of war." Alan met her gaze steadily. "I understand the risks, Captain. I didn't join to fight. I joined because people are dying and I can help." "Admirable," she said, though her tone suggested she might have chosen another word. "But I need everyone on this ship capable of defending themselves and others if necessary. With respect, Captain, I took an oath to do no harm. I won't take lives." Captain Summers sighed. "We'll revisit this discussion later, Doctor. For now, I hope your skills are as good as your reputation suggests. We ship out for the Callisto sector tomorrow. The fighting there has been intense." The next week proved busy for Alan. The Resolute joined a battle group near Jupiter's moon, Callisto, where Drax forces had been attacking mining operations. Casualties came in waves and Alan worked tirelessly. By the end of that first week, even the most skeptical crew members had to admit the new doctor was exceptional. He performed surgeries that seemed impossible, saved limbs that others would have amputated, and worked for hours without rest. Command Sergeant Major Frank Miller watched Alan work one night, standing in the back of the medical bay as the doctor saved a Marine with a chest wound that should have been fatal. "He's good," Miller admitted to Lieutenant Diane Wells, who stood beside him. "But being good at fixing people isn't enough out here." "Give him time," Wells replied. "There's something about him that doesn't add up." She was more right than she knew. The next day, a captured Drax being treated for injuries looked at Alan and hissed something in its native language. The translator rendered it a moment later. "There's something wrong with your scent, human healer. Something not right." Alan just continued treating the alien's wounds, his face betraying nothing. But that night, alone in his quarters, he stared at his reflection in the mirror for a long time, wondering why the alien's words had sent a chill down his spine. The alarm blared through the Resolute at 300 hours, jolting Alan from his sleep. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. "All medical personnel report to stations," the AI announced. "Incoming casualties. Colony distress call on Vega Prime." Alan dressed quickly and ran to the medical bay. His team was already preparing equipment when Captain Summers' voice came over the comms. Drax raiders hit the mining colony on Vega Prime. There are survivors. We're sending down rescue teams. Dr. Carter, prepare to receive wounded. Alan worked efficiently, organizing his team. Lisa, trauma kits. Kyle, prep the surgical suite. Mason, ready the blood substitutes. When the captain appeared at the medical bay door, Alan knew something had changed. Doctor, we're short on combat medics, she said. You're going planetside. Captain, I'm more useful here. Not negotiable. The colony's medical center is still intact but cut off. They have wounded who can't be moved. 4 Marines will escort you. 20 minutes later, Alan found himself in a drop shuttle, strapped in beside Marines in full combat gear. Corporal Ben Howard, Privates Ryan Ellis, Judy Grant, and Steve Ortiz checked their weapons while Alan clutched his medical bag. The shuttle landed with a jolt. The ramp lowered, revealing a scene of destruction. The colony's main plaza was littered with debris and bodies. Smoke rose from buildings in the distance. Stay close, Doc, Corporal Howard said as they moved out. Medical center's a half-mile north. They moved through the ruined streets, the Marines forming a protective circle around Alan. Twice they ducked into doorways as Drax patrol craft flew overhead. Almost there, Howard whispered as they approached a white building with a red cross symbol. Looks clear. The shot came from nowhere. Private Ellis screamed and fell, green Drax energy blast burning through his shoulder. Contact! Howard yelled as the rest of the team returned fire. 7 Drax warriors emerged from the ruins across the street. Tall, reptilian, and covered in armored scales, they moved with frightening speed. Get the doc inside, Howard ordered as he fired. We'll hold them off. Alan ran to Ellis, who was bleeding badly. I need to treat him now. No time, Ortiz yelled, grabbing Alan and dragging him toward the medical center while Grant provided covering fire. They crashed through the doors. Inside, Colonial medical staff looked up in surprise. Marines, Ortiz gasped. We have wounded outside. Need backup. Alan didn't wait. He ran back outside despite Ortiz's shouts. Howard was down and Grant was firing desperately as 3 Drax closed in. Ellis lay motionless in the street. Something happened in Alan's mind. A switch flipped. The world seemed to slow down. Alan opened his medical bag and took out a scalpel. His face went blank, his eyes changing from brown to an unnatural pale blue. He moved with sudden, inhuman speed. The first Drax never saw him coming. Alan's scalpel found the gap between armor plates at the neck, severing the major artery. The second Drax turned, firing wildly, but Alan was already moving, sliding beneath the shot. His hand came up, holding a bone saw that tore through the alien's leg. The third Drax roared and charged. Alan stepped aside, impossibly fast, and jammed a chest decompression needle through the alien's eye. Grant watched in shock as the seemingly harmless doctor took down 3 Drax warriors in seconds. The remaining aliens retreated, firing wildly. Alan stood among the fallen enemies, medical instruments dripping with dark green blood. Then he calmly knelt beside Howard and began treating his wounds with perfect precision. Ellis needs plasma, he said in a flat voice. GSW to the upper thorax, no major vessels hit. Doc? Grant whispered. What just happened? Alan looked up, his eyes slowly fading back to their normal brown. He blinked several times, looking confused. What do you mean? I came out to help. Did you take care of the Drax? Grant stared at the green blood covering Alan's hands and the dead aliens around them. Yeah, we took care of them. When reinforcements arrived 10 minutes later, Alan was treating the wounded with no memory of what had happened. But the Marines who had seen it would never look at the pacifist. Ducked the same way again. Command Sergeant Major Frank Miller stared at the report on his screen. Private Grant's account of what happened on Vega Prime didn't make sense. The pacifist doctor taking down 3 Drax warriors with medical tools? Impossible. Computer, pull up Dr. Carter's service record, he ordered. The screen filled with information. Alan's medical credentials were impressive, but there was a 6-month gap in his history 3 years ago. The file simply said, Special Medical Research Division, Classified. Miller's eyes narrowed. He had been in the service long enough to know when something was being hidden. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Alan worked tirelessly. Since returning from Vega Prime 2 days ago, he had performed 12 surgeries. Even seasoned combat doctors were amazed at his stamina and skill. "Should rest, sir?" Nurse Lisa Chen said as Alan finished stitching a Marine's wound. "I'm fine," Alan replied, though dark circles had formed under his eyes. "How's Private Ellis?" "Recovering well. He keeps asking about you. Says you saved his life out there." Alan nodded absently. "Just doing my job." That night, as Alan finally returned to his quarters, he found Captain Summers waiting outside his door. "Doctor," she said, "we need to talk." Inside, she got straight to the point. 3 Marines have given statements about what happened on Vega Prime. They say you killed 3 Drax warriors with surgical tools. Alan frowned. "That's not possible. I'm not a fighter." "The Marines aren't lying, Doctor. And security camera footage from the colony shows something very unusual." She handed him a tablet. The grainy video showed Alan moving with impossible speed, his movements precise and lethal. His eyes glowed a pale blue in the footage. "That's not me," Alan whispered, but a cold feeling settled in his stomach. "It is you," Summers said quietly. "What I want to know is how a pacifist doctor who refused combat training can move like that." Before Alan could answer, the ship alarm sounded. Drax vessels detected. All hands to battle stations. The Resolute shook as the first enemy shots hit its shields. Alan and Summers ran to their posts. In the medical bay, wounded began arriving minutes after the battle started. Alan worked automatically, his hands steady despite the ship's violent movements. Then the lights flickered. The ship's AI announced, "Hull breach in sections 7 through 9. Security teams respond. Medical bay lockdown initiated." Alan looked up from his patient. "Lockdown? We can't lock down with wounded still coming in." The medical bay doors sealed anyway, trapping Alan, 2 nurses, and 8 patients inside. Outside in the corridor, they heard weapons fire and alien screeching. "Boarders," Nurse Chen whispered. The Drax got aboard. The doors bulged as something powerful hit them from outside. The metal began to glow red as cutting tools worked on the lock. "Get behind me," Alan told the nurses. "Move the patients to the back room." As they scrambled to obey, the ship's AI spoke again. "Medical bay security compromised. Hostile forces attempting entry." Alan picked up a scalpel, knowing how useless it would be against armored Drax warriors. His hand trembled. The door burst open. 4 Drax soldiers stepped into the medical bay, weapons raised. Alan felt a strange pressure building in his head. A high-pitched ringing filled his ears. Fragments of memory flashed before his eyes. A white room, doctors in masks, pain in his spine, a voice saying, "Protocol Asclepius." The security camera in the corner recorded what happened next. Alan's posture changed. His trembling stopped. His eyes shifted from brown to pale blue. When he spoke, his voice was different, flat, analytical. "Threat assessment. 4 hostile. Combatants. Civilian protection protocol activated, engaging." What followed happened so quickly that the camera barely captured it. Alan moved between the Drax soldiers like water, his scalpel finding the weak points in their armor with surgical precision. He used a metal tray as a shield, deflecting energy, blasts back at one attacker. In 23 seconds, all 4 Drax lay dead or dying on the medical bay floor. Alan calmly locked the damaged door, then returned to his patient on the operating table. He resumed the procedure as if nothing had happened, while the nurses stared in silent shock at the green blood pooling around his feet. Command Sergeant Major Frank Miller stared at the report on his screen. Private Grant's account of what happened on Vega Prime didn't make sense. The pacifist doctor taking down 3 Drax warriors with medical tools? Impossible. "Computer, pull up Dr. Carter's service record," he ordered. The screen filled with information. Alan's medical credentials were impressive, but there was a 6-month gap in his history 3 years ago. The file simply said, Special Medical Research Division, Classified. Miller's eyes narrowed. He had been in the service long enough to know when something was being hidden. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Alan worked tirelessly. Since returning from Vega Prime 2 days ago, he had performed 12 surgeries. Even seasoned combat doctors were amazed at his stamina and skill. "Should rest, sir?" Nurse Lisa Chen said as Alan finished stitching a Marine's wound. "I'm fine," Alan replied, though dark circles had formed under his eyes. "How's Private Ellis?" "Recovering well. He keeps asking about you. Says you saved his life out there." Alan nodded absently. "Just doing my job." That night, as Alan finally returned to his quarters, he found Captain Summers waiting outside his door. "Doctor," she said, "we need to talk." Inside, she got straight to the point. 3 Marines have given statements about what happened on Vega Prime. They say you killed 3 Drax warriors with surgical tools. Alan frowned. "That's not possible. I'm not a fighter." "The Marines aren't lying, Doctor. And security camera footage from the colony shows something very unusual." She handed him a tablet. The grainy video showed Alan moving with impossible speed. His movements precise and lethal. His eyes glowed a pale blue in the footage. "That's not me," Alan whispered, but a cold feeling settled in his stomach. "It is you," Summers said quietly. "What I want to know is how a pacifist doctor who refused combat training can move like that." Before Alan could answer, the ship alarm sounded. Drax vessels detected. All hands to battle stations. The Resolute shook as the first enemy shots hit its shields. Alan and Summers ran to their posts. In the medical bay, wounded began arriving minutes after the battle started. Alan worked automatically, his hands steady despite the ship's violent movements. Then the lights flickered. The ship's AI announced, "Hull breach in sections 7 through 9. Security teams respond. Medical bay lockdown initiated." Alan looked up from his patient. "Lockdown? We can't lock down with wounded still coming in." The medical bay doors sealed anyway, trapping Alan, 2 nurses, and 8 patients inside. Outside in the corridor, they heard weapons fire and alien screeching. "Boarders," Nurse Chen whispered. The Drax got aboard. The doors bulged as something powerful hit them from outside. The metal began to glow red as cutting tools worked on the lock. "Get behind me," Alan told the nurses. "Move the patients to the back room." As they scrambled to obey, the ship's AI spoke again. "Medical bay security compromised. Hostile forces attempting entry." Alan picked up a scalpel, knowing how useless it would be against armored Drax warriors. His hand trembled. The door burst open. 4 Drax soldiers stepped into the medical bay, weapons raised. Alan felt a strange pressure building in his head. A high-pitched ringing filled his ears. Fragments of memory flashed before his eyes. A white room, doctors in masks, pain in his spine, a voice saying, "Protocol Asclepius." The security camera in the corner recorded what happened next. Alan's posture changed. His trembling stopped. His eyes shifted from brown to pale blue. When he spoke, his voice was different, flat, analytical. "Threat assessment. 4 hostile. Combatants. Civilian protection protocol activated, engaging." What followed happened so quickly that the camera barely captured it. Alan moved between the Drax soldiers like water, his scalpel finding the weak points in their armor with surgical precision. He used a metal tray as a shield, deflecting energy blasts back at one attacker. In 23 seconds, all 4 Drax lay dead or dying on the medical bay floor. Alan calmly locked the damaged door, then returned to his patient on the operating table. He resumed the procedure as if nothing had happened while the nurses stared in silent shock at the green blood pooling around his feet. The Resolute shook violently as Drax weapons fire pounded its shields. Alan ran to the medical bay, bracing himself against the walls as the ship rocked from explosions. "Status report," he called as he entered. 6 wounded already, Doctor," Nurse Chen replied. Engine room took a direct hit. Alan moved quickly from patient to patient. Burns, broken bones, shrapnel wounds. His hands worked automatically while his mind raced with unanswered questions. Captain Summers' voice came over the comms. "All hands, prepare for emergency maneuvers. Brace for impact." The ship lurched sideways. Alan grabbed a support beam as equipment crashed to the floor. A massive explosion somewhere below sent a shudder through the entire vessel. The lights flickered and died, replaced by dim emergency lighting. The ship's AI spoke in a damaged, stuttering voice. "Critical damage to sections 12 through 24. Life support failing in lower decks. Artificial gravity compromised." Alan felt the change immediately as gravity weakened. Medical supplies began floating around the room. "Secure the patients," he ordered. "Use the emergency straps." Another hit rocked the ship. The medical bay door jammed halfway open as the power fluctuated. Through the gap, Alan saw sparks and smoke in the corridor. The ship's AI spoke again. "Warning, hull breach imminent. Section 8 emergency bulkheads engaged." Alan realized with horror that they were about to be cut off. "Everyone out. We need to get to auxiliary medical on the upper deck." They began moving patients through the jammed door. The ship shuddered again. "Dr. Carter," Lieutenant Bishop appeared in the corridor. "Captain's orders, we're abandoning the lower decks. You need to move now." "We still have 3 critical patients," Alan said, pointing to the people still on beds. "I'll help," Bishop replied, entering the medical bay. Before they could move the remaining patients, a deafening crash echoed through the ship. The corridor outside the medical bay crumpled as a massive breach tore through the outer hull. The emergency bulkhead slammed shut, sealing Alan, Bishop, and the 3 patients in the medical bay. "Situation update," the AI announced. "Hull breach contained. Sections 6 through 11 sealed. Atmosphere stable in sealed sections but no route to evacuation points." Bishop tried the comms. "Bridge, this is Bishop. We're trapped in medical with Dr. Carter and 3 wounded," Static answered him. "Communications compromised," the AI reported. Bishop checked his tactical pad. "Drax boarding parties have breached the ship. They're everywhere between us and the escape pods." Alan looked at his patients, a young engineer with severe burns, an older navigator with internal bleeding, and a Marine with a head injury. All needed immediate evacuation. "There's a maintenance shaft," he said, pointing to a small access panel. "It runs alongside the main corridor. We might be able to move the patients through there." Bishop nodded grimly. "I've got 6 rounds left in my sidearm, not enough for the number of Drax between us and safety." While they prepared to move, Lieutenant Wells was in the ship's secure data center, downloading files as the evacuation alarm blared. Her security clearance had finally granted her access to classified records. The screen showed a file labeled Project Asclepius. The description read, "Experimental program to create dual-state combat medics. Subjects genetically modified to maintain separate neural pathways, healer and warrior, activated by threat assessment triggers." Wells downloaded everything she could find. One report caught her eye. "Subject AC-7 deemed failure. Combat programming never properly initialized. Recommendation: return subject to civilian medical practice with memory suppression." The initials AC matched Alan Carter. Back in the medical bay, Alan and Bishop had managed to get 2 patients into the maintenance shaft. The engineer with burns went first, then the navigator. Alan was preparing to move the Marine with the head injury when they heard the sounds, claws scraping on metal, the hiss of Drax breath. "They're coming," Bishop whispered, drawing his weapon. Alan felt the pressure building in his head again, the ringing in his ears. Flashes of memory, a female scientist saying, "The protocol works by keeping the combat programming dormant until extreme threat conditions are met." Another voice. "Subject AC-7 shows no activation response. The neural barrier is too strong." The scientist again. "Increase the dosage. His psychological profile makes him perfect. His healer ethics create the ideal firewall between states." The sounds of Drax grew louder. Alan looked at his injured patient, then at Bishop with his 6 bullets, and something inside him changed. "Get in the shaft," he told Bishop, his voice different now. "Take the patient, I'll hold them off." "With what?" Bishop asked. Alan's eyes had already changed to that eerie pale blue. "With everything I have." Bishop stared at Alan, unsure of what he was seeing. The doctor's entire body language had changed. Gone was the gentle healer, replaced by something predatory and focused. "I said go," Alan repeated, his voice eerily calm. "Now." Bishop hesitated, then nodded. He helped the injured Marine into the maintenance shaft and looked back one last time. "Stay alive, Doctor," he said. "That's the plan," Alan replied, but it didn't sound like him anymore. As the shaft door closed, Alan moved to the medical supply cabinet. His movements were precise, economical. He gathered surgical tape, scalpels, bone saws, and a bottle of pure alcohol. His mind calculated angles, distances, weak points in Drax anatomy. The first Drax warrior broke through the jammed door, weapon raised. Alan was already moving. He threw the alcohol bottle, followed by a surgical laser that ignited the liquid in mid-air. The fireball engulfed the alien, its scales sizzling. Alan slid under the burning Drax, a scalpel finding the soft spot behind its knee. 3 more warriors entered, firing energy weapons. But Alan was never where they aimed, moving with impossible speed. In the maintenance shaft, Bishop helped the wounded along, hearing the sounds of combat behind them, screeches of pain, the thud of bodies falling. He couldn't believe what was happening. 15 minutes later, Bishop reached the upper deck where Captain Summers was organizing the evacuation. "You made it," she said, relief in her voice. "Where's Dr. Carter?" "Still in medical," Bishop replied. "He stayed behind. You wouldn't believe what I saw." Summers' expression darkened. "We need to go back for him." "Too late," said a voice behind them. They turned to see Lieutenant Wells, carrying a data pad. "The entire section is overrun. No one could survive that." "Carter could," Bishop said quietly. Wells looked at them both. "We need to talk. Now." In a quiet corner away from the evacuation chaos, Wells showed them the files she'd recovered. "Project Asclepius," she explained. "A military program to create the perfect combat medic. They took doctors with exceptional skills and gave them a second personality, a combat specialist that could be activated when needed." "That's not possible," Summers said. "It is," Wells insisted. "They used genetic modification and neural programming. The subjects maintained their medical ethics in normal situations, but could switch to combat mode when threatened." "And Carter was one of these subjects?" Bishop asked. Wells nodded. "Subject AC-7. The files say he was deemed a failure because his combat programming never properly activated during testing. They returned him to civilian practice with his memories suppressed." "Well, it's activating now," Bishop said grimly. Back in the medical bay, Alan stood surrounded by the bodies of 17 Drax warriors. His medical tools were coated in green blood. His uniform was torn and burned in places, but he had no serious injuries. The ship's emergency lighting cast red shadows across the carnage. Alan felt no emotion as he surveyed the scene. His mind functioned like a computer, processing data, calculating next actions. "Threats neutralized," he said to no one. "Proceed to evacuation point." He stepped over the bodies and moved into the corridor. More Drax were coming. He could hear them, but he knew exactly where they were and how to avoid them. As he navigated the damaged ship, flashes of memory continued to surface. He remembered now, the white rooms, the tests, the injections. He remembered Dr. Patricia Winters, the project director, with her cold eyes and precise manner. "Your psychological profile is perfect," she had told him. "Your devotion to healing creates a natural firewall between your normal state and the combat programming." He remembered why he had volunteered. The colony on Vega 2. His wife and daughter had been there when the Drax attacked. He had wanted revenge but couldn't betray his healer's oath. Project Asclepius had offered a solution, a way to both heal and kill. Alan reached the upper deck and found the evacuation point. Marines raised weapons when they saw him, covered in green blood. "Stand down," Captain Summers ordered. "Dr. Carter?" Alan looked at her, his eyes slowly fading from pale blue back to brown. He blinked several times, swaying on his feet. "Captain," he said weakly, I remember everything now." Then he collapsed, his mind finally overwhelmed by the merging of his two separate selves. Alan woke in a white room. For a moment, he thought he was back in the Project Asclepius facility, but then he recognized the military hospital on Mars base. He tried to sit up, finding his body weak and sore. "Easy there," said a familiar voice. Captain Summers sat in a chair beside his bed. "You've been out for 3 days." "The ship?" Alan asked, his throat dry. "The Resolute is being repaired. We made it out, thanks largely to you." She handed him a cup of water. 37 Drax warriors. That's how many you took down. The security feeds recovered from the ship showed everything. Alan sipped the water slowly. His mind felt different now. The fog had lifted. He remembered it all. His training, the experiments, the pain of having his mind split into 2 parts. And he remembered his family. "They told us you were a failed experiment," Summers continued. "That your combat programming never activated properly. Clearly, they were wrong." "It never activated in controlled testing," Alan explained. "They never understood what would truly trigger it. The need to protect others, not myself." The door opened and a woman in a lab coat entered. Her hair was gray now, but Alan recognized her immediately. Dr. Patricia Winters, director of Project Asclepius. His muscles tensed. "Hello, Alan," she said, her voice cool and professional. "Or should I say AC-7? You've caused quite a stir in military circles." "You have no right to be here," Alan said, his voice hardening. "Actually, I do. You're still technically military property." She smiled thinly. "The neural programming we gave you cost millions to develop." Summers stood up. "He's a member of my crew, Doctor, not property." Winters ignored her. "We've reviewed the combat footage, Alan. Remarkable. Your combat efficiency exceeds our most optimistic projections. We want you back in the program." "As what? A test subject?" "As a prototype. We can refine the process now that we understand the proper trigger mechanism." She tapped her tablet. "The Joint Chiefs have already approved full funding for a new generation of combat medics based on your neural pattern." Alan felt the stirring in his mind, the combat programming assessing Winters as a potential threat. But now he was aware of it, could feel the separate parts of his mind working together. "I won't go back," he said firmly. "You don't have a choice," Winters replied. "The legal paperwork you signed was for a program that officially doesn't exist," interrupted a new voice. Admiral Victor Hayes stepped into the room. "Dr. Winters, you're dismissed." The Admiral waited until Winters had left before speaking again. "I've reviewed your file, Dr. Carter, and I've seen what you did on the Resolute. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it." "What happens now?" Alan asked. "That depends on you," Hayes said. "Legally, we can't force you back into Winters' program, but we could use someone with your unique abilities." "I'm a doctor first," Alan insisted. "Exactly why you're valuable," Hayes replied. "The Drax don't respect our medical personnel. They target them, but they fear you now. The Bloodwalker, they call you. Word is spreading among their forces." Over the next week, as Alan recovered, he worked with Lieutenant Wells to understand his condition. The mental wall between his healer and warrior sides was dissolving. Instead of switching completely between states, he was learning to access both simultaneously. "It's like having 2 computers running at once," he explained to Wells during a session. "I can be calculating surgical procedures while also identifying combat threats." "Can you control when the combat skills activate?" she asked. "More and more," he admitted. "It's like exercising a muscle I didn't know I had." 2 weeks. After the battle, Alan returned to duty. The Resolute had been repaired enough for limited operations. Captain Summers had requested he stay on as chief medical officer. His first day back, he found his medical team watching him with a mixture of awe and nervousness. "Nothing has changed," he told them. "I'm still a doctor. Saving lives is still my priority." But everything had changed. When a Marine unit prepared for a ground mission on a contested moon, Alan joined them in the shuttle bay, medical bag in hand. "Doc's coming with us?" one Marine asked nervously. Be glad, another replied. I saw the security footage. Having him is like having an extra platoon. Captain Summers approached as Alan checked his supplies. You don't have to do both jobs, you know. Yes, Alan said, looking up at her. I do. For the first time since losing his family, Alan felt complete. He would heal the wounded, and he would make sure no one else suffered as he had. The Dracs would learn that human medics were not easy targets. They were the most dangerous humans of all. 6 months later, the war with the Dracs had changed. Intelligence reports showed that Drax warriors were now avoiding areas where human, medical personnel were present. The aliens had added a new symbol to their tactical displays, a red cross with a slash through it, marking human medics as high-threat targets. Alan sat in a briefing room aboard the command ship Dauntless. The Resolute had been reassigned to his command, now serving as a mobile medical and special operations platform. Captain Summers had received a promotion, but chose to remain with her ship and its unusual medical officer. Admiral Hayes stood at the front of the room addressing the assembled officers. Operation Mercy Falls begins in 12 hours. Our target is the Drax Command Center on Europa. Intel suggests they're holding 27 human medical personnel captured from outposts across the Jupiter system. Alan studied the tactical display. The Drax facility was heavily fortified, built into the ice of Jupiter's moon. Dr. Carter will lead the extraction team. Hayes continued. Captain Summers will provide orbital support and evacuation. After the briefing, Lieutenant Bishop approached Alan. The men are calling this a suicide mission. That facility has over 100 Drax warriors. They're not expecting us to come through the medical labs, Alan replied. And they're definitely not expecting me. Alan had spent months training a small unit of combat medics. Not like him. They didn't have the neural modifications, but they were skilled in both medicine and combat. They called themselves the Healers, though the rest of the military had another name for them, Bloodwalkers, after Alan. As the assault shuttle approached Europa, Alan checked his equipment one last time, standard medical bag, plus a few specialized tools. No firearms. He still wouldn't use guns, finding his medical instruments more precise and just as lethal in his hands. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot announced. Alan looked at his team. Remember your training. Save our people first. Only engage the enemy when necessary. The shuttle landed in a frozen canyon 2 miles from the facility. Alan's team moved quickly across the icy surface, their white medical uniforms blending with Europa's snowy landscape. They reached the facility's exterior vent system, an access point intelligence had identified. Inside, they moved silently through maintenance tunnels until they reached the medical section. Alan sensed something was wrong immediately. This is too easy, he whispered. As if on cue, lights flooded the corridor. A voice spoke in heavily accented English. The Bloodwalker arrives as predicted. A large door opened, revealing a Drax commander bigger than any Alan had seen before. Behind him were the human captives, medical personnel in torn uniforms. I am Supreme Commander Kravax, the Drax said. I wish to meet the human who has caused such disruption in our forces. Alan stepped forward, eyes shifting to their pale blue combat state. Release the prisoners. Fascinating, Kravax said, studying Alan. Our scientists said such a dual-nature being was impossible. Yet here you stand, healer and killer in one body. I won't ask again, Alan warned. The Drax commander made a gesture, and the prisoners were pushed forward. Take them. They are of no use to us now. As Alan's team began evacuating the captives, Kravax continued. We believed humans were weak. Prey. Soft creatures who healed their wounded instead of letting them die as nature intended. Now we see this was an evolutionary miscalculation. You attacked us, Alan said simply. We defended ourselves, yes, and in doing so revealed an adaptation we did not anticipate. The commander stepped closer. You, Bloodwalker, represent something new, the perfect balance of mercy and violence. Without warning, Kravax drew a ceremonial blade. Alan tensed, ready for attack, but instead, the Drax laid the weapon on the ground. My leaders have authorized me to discuss terms, not surrender, but perhaps coexistence. 3 weeks later, Alan stood in a large auditorium at the Mars Military Academy. Before him were 30 human volunteers, the first official class of combat medics based on the Asclepius Protocol. They would not undergo the neural modifications he had endured, but would instead be trained to balance both aspects of their service. The Dracs respected us when we showed strength, Alan told them, but they only considered peace when we showed them what makes humans truly dangerous, our compassion. After the lecture, Alan walked to the medical wing where the injured from both sides were treated. Human doctors worked alongside their Drax counterparts, each learning from the other. In one bed lay a young Drax warrior, wounded in what might be the final battle of the war. Alan checked the alien's vital signs, adjusting the treatment plan. The Drax looked up at him, recognition in its yellow eyes. "The Bloodwalker," it said through the translator. "I am honored to be healed by your hands." "Just a doctor," Alan replied with a small smile. "One who learned to protect what he cares about." As he moved to the next